Hey guys, it's Ornlu, and today I want to talk about maps. One of the, I guess, most important things in any game of Age of Empires. I mean, you have three main components to a game. You have the player, their civilization, and the map. And maps are one of those things in the AoE2 community that have changed a lot over the years. And today I wanted to take the opportunity to go through some of the classic maps and how they've evolved over the years by comparing the Age of Conquerors versions to the more modern variations, and just the sort of ways that we see how maps work and why we've seen the changes that we do, and just sort of take a moment to appreciate just how far we've come when it comes to designing different map scripts. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to go through the original or the maps that existed in the original Age of Conquerors, and then compare them to their DE versions, or rather, looking at the DE versions, then comparing them to the Age of Conquerors versions, and just pointing out just all of the little differences we have there. And it sort of, I think, will tell a bit of a story as to what we as an AoE2 community prioritize when it comes to, okay, what do we think of as like fair and fun competitive map settings, and all of that good stuff. So I'm going to start, of course, with Arabia. It is the first map alphabetically back in Age of Conquerors, and this is probably the most, how should I say this, dynamic map. It's the most played map, and it's the one that's received the most changes over the years when it comes to either tournaments or even just the specific ladder version. And the current Arabia generation looks something like this. I could be going through like a notepad document with all of the specific, map scripting tools, but one, I barely understand that, and two, that's not really a great visual demonstration. So, as you can see, in the current Arabia generation, the wood lines are very far away, relatively speaking. I mean, at the standard resolution, it's like, around a third to half the screen away from my town center at any given time. Also, you can see that players are given specific wood lines. There are, the wood lines are fairly small, they're sparse, and there are a lot of them. There are a lot of tiny little wood lines. There are occasionally oases that might even have a shorefish in them, which can, of course, affect a player's start. But in general, the reason that Arabia is the most played map is because it has the most, dynamic strategies. Also, DE added all of the different terrains and whatnot. Just know that they don't really make too much of a difference. But as you can see here, it's very difficult to wall. The wood lines are far away. Your resources are spread out. And another big thing that we'll see is the hill distribution and cliffs, as in there are no cliffs in DE Arabia. Whereas hills, there are a lot of them. They're kind of just hanging out all over the place. There are these little bumps, maybe 3 tiles high. Some maybe a little bit more than that, but in general, we're looking at a lot of smaller hills. So with this picture of Arabia in mind, let's go ahead and go back in time to what AoC Arabia looked like. All right, here we are, guys. Throwback time. We are now in the CD version of Age of Conquerors, so all the way back to 2001. And this is what Arabia looked like back then, or at least one of the versions of it. By the way, this is the CD version, but I'm playing on user patch, so that's why we have HD and all that stuff. 1920 by 1080. But yeah, man, doesn't this game look different, especially the golden stone. Anyway, you can see here that Arabia, it's much more random. There are cliffs here. Resources are just kind of scattered around. Deer and sheep can spawn very far away and irregularly from the town center. And then when you have these hills, they're usually just like huge hills. Not so much like these tiny little intermittently sparse hills. It's like there's these giant hills that cross, just a whole chunk of the map. The forests are fewer and they are larger. There are cliffs everywhere. And that's just something that's completely gone in DE. You can see just another generation. Same principle still, even though we're on like the desert version of Arabia. You can have these huge hills right by your base, but you typically don't have hills that completely impede town center building. Like usually you can find somewhere decent to build a TC. But yeah, the hills are everywhere. the wood lines are not necessarily even. You also get these gems of map generations. Oh my goodness, look at this player's stone. Doesn't that take us back? And yeah, just there's so much... it's just so much more random, right? This player has 2 wood lines. This player has like 4-ish, but they're all kind of bad. And then, yeah, again, the cliffs are everywhere, just sort of winding about. The oases are certainly not evenly distributed, and we just get a map that is a lot more chaotic than what we would see in a, modern Arabia. Like in this generation, this person has 2 relics right next to them, whereas this person has none. So you can see how, on that sort of sense, the DE version is much more balanced. But I also think that we lose a little bit of the charm of the original Arabia, especially when it comes to wood lines. Like, these wood lines are thick, and there are fewer of them, and the few wood lines that are also notably, I think, a bit closer to the town center, they are less susceptible to archers, right? Because in DE, the wood lines are so small that you're always going to have crossbowmen shooting over them. Whereas, like, if you have a lumber camp over here, it's much harder for archers to range that. Here as well, the wood lines are making up more of the wall. So you have, in some cases, a map that is more extreme and also less extreme than the typical, DE version. So it's just, I think, interesting to see what has been prioritized. Maps that are more standard, maps that are less extreme in their variation, but also in that way sort of pushing a certain meta, much more so than the original Arabia, which, as we see here, it is literally all over the place. Like, look at this forest. It's not even a forest, man. This as well. Oases were huge back then. Anyway, I'm spending a lot of time talking about Arabia just because it is like the map that is the most played. Don't worry, the other sections will be shorter, but that is going to be Arabia, guys. Alrighty, so the second Age of Conquerors classic map we're going to look at is, of course, Arena, Clown Town, everybody's other favorite map. And this is obviously in DE. How this map has changed over the years, it's actually pretty different, but in much more subtle ways. At its core, Arena, you're nearish the edge of the map, you have these walls protecting you, most of the map is forest, and then you have the clearing in the middle with no hills where all the fighting happens. But there are some important things to note. As we'll see later, compared to the original version of Arena, you start much closer to the edge of the map. This means that rush distances between the players are greater, making early aggression more difficult to pull off, but you're also, because you're closer to the edge of the map, you don't necessarily have as much room to expand in the back. Sometimes you don't have any room at all, depending on the generation. But, we just click a few different generations. You can see this one doesn't really have that much room in the back. Also, your gates are placed in the center of walls to make things easier, and you'll see that is not the case in Age of Conquerors. Also, relics are designed to be relatively even in their generation. It's not always the case, but if you just look at the white dots on the minimap in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, you can see that the relics are more or less generating towards the center. Another important thing to note is that you always have your all your resources inside your walls, all of your deer equivalents, your sheep, geese, whatever, and your boars, and that you always have exactly your main gold, your main stone, and then 1 secondary gold in your base. And that's it. Your other secondary gold and your secondary stone are always outside your walls, and that is the case for both players in every single game. Now, let's see how things used to look back in the day. Already back in our time machine to Age of Conquerors, we see a map that's definitely different. First, you see that you can have sheep, on either side of your wall. Gates are always at the end, which can sometimes be helpful, sometimes not. It led to, if you have 2 gates, you can then tower hop sometimes. There's also like this relic that's trapped in the wall, which is pretty hilarious. Players are also a little bit closer together on average, as they are, again, on average, a little bit further away from the edge of the map. Like, you can fit both players' walls here on one screen. Another noticeable difference is that you often have this be the case. So you can see here that in the case of the blue player here, they get all of their resources in their base, at least all of their golds. Where's their stone? Also, 2 of their sheep are on the outside. So yeah, you've got your main stone, secondary stone, and both secondary golds in the back of your base. Pretty nice, right? But if you look at the red player, okay, sure, they have a secondary gold outside of their base, and their main gold is forward, But look at this. They have 2 neutral golds. They have both neutral golds in the back of their base. And this is not the case in DE. You always are getting the neutral golds in the middle of the map. Also, you have like relics that are randomly close together. Sheep, this boar is outside of the walls. So what you often had to do is prop open the gate with a sheep and then push the boar in that way. Or if your deer spawned outside of your walls, as is the case right here, sometimes you actually have to delete a wall just so that you can push everybody through. You can see here, boar also outside of the walls. And this was just a much more common experience. Also, this one only generated with 2 relics. Well, that's weird. You can see that map scripts were much more rough around the edges. You can see a relic is in this player's base. Oh my goodness. But yeah, that's going to be, the differences between modern and classic arena. So next up is going to be Archipelago, a map that we don't really see in competitive play all that often because it is so variable. But again, starting with the DE version, one of the things that you'll notice on all of the water maps is that the fish are attempted to be spawned in a fairly even and consistent fashion throughout the map so that the distances between fish are fairly consistent and you're not having like a huge clump in one side and another clump on the other. But as you can see here in Archipelago, sometimes you only have one island. Both players here are connected by land, and there's only one island, like the mainland, and then there is this smaller island over here that has a relic, a stone, and gold. Now this can vary a fair bit. This time there are 2 islands, players still connected by land. Okay, players are still connected by land, but this time it's like shaped like the letter H, or I guess. Everything's off to islands on one side. I swear, you can spawn with, there we go. You can spawn with players on separate islands. And there is this pretty consistent, usually 2 islands, and when there are islands, they are, generally speaking, between the players. But I will say that this, even in DE, is a pretty erratic map and can have a lot of different crazy variations. Like if we bump it up to 4-player size, you can have versions that everybody has their own island, versions where, yellow and blue are on the same island, red and green are on the same island, and now there are 3 in the middle. There's just a lot going on with Archipelago. So let's just see how this compares to the original wild version. All right, back in the land before time, we can see that the classic version of Archipelago, it's not that much different. Some of the bigger, differences, the fish generation is a lot more wild, I guess, and inconsistent. Like there's this big empty patch of ocean right here, whereas there's this huge patch of fish over here. This whole spot's empty. And DE definitely standardized that to some degree, but you still have, the pretty wild different maps. There are always some resources on the islands, but here you can see, does it go? Yeah, it does connect all the way to the side of the map, and this one is actually saleable. I mean, you can get some pretty different map scripts. Yeah, this one, it's connected on this side, but not on this side. You can sail through those shallows. And overall, this is just a map that's not super consistent. Here we have one that players are on different islands, and, there's a little bit of gold over there, there's stone over there. Here, there's one island that's kind of off the coast just for the red player, and it's way easier for them to take, and, they'd get all of these resources, which is pretty darn imbalanced. This one is actually pretty decent. This one, look at this. The islands are right next to red, and they're further away from blue, which means that this is much easier to defend, but also their fishing is going to be worse early on. So yeah, you can see there's definitely inconsistency here. Next, moving to the lands of T-West maps, we are on Baltic, which is pretty much the classic sort of hybrid map. And this one, I'll just say right off the bat, it's very similar between both games. You have either player on the side of a lake. Oftentimes that lake has a little flippity-doodle thing here at the side. You can see here, the lake can generate in all sorts of shapes. And this can vary between, different amounts of players as well. And the sides, there are some cliffs, there are some forests, hills, players fairly close to the water. And as we'll see, the big distinction in DE is that the fish are going to be pretty evenly split. Again, like all water and hybrid maps. And you also have the case where each player has 2 relics. Let's see, relic here. And then there's always going to be the 5th relic on a little bit of shallows in the lake somewhere as a sort of extra incentive for water control. And you can see that it's going to be very consistent with players having relics, to themselves. Again, in an effort to make things more balanced. Okay, so back now in the Conquerors, you can see that the map is very similar. Did not need to get that much alteration over the years. The big difference is that the fish are perhaps a little bit less evenly distributed. Yeah, look at this big empty patch of lake over here. Again, empty-ish patch over here, and then there's a very dense patch over here. And then the relics are just kind of scattered around haphazardly. This one has like a peninsula in it. And then we're just looking at a map that's a bit less consistent in general, but otherwise, it's Baltic. It's the same as it always has been. You still have a little floopity-doo oftentimes, but not all the time. Next up is going to be everybody's favorite big noob team game map, Black Forest. And in the DE version, we have a relic that's very sad in the woods. Honestly, it's pretty similar to the classic version. You have all of these winding, twisting, paths through the trees. Usually, you only have a single choke point for enemy in a 1v1. The pond generation is something that is a little bit on the controversial side in the current Black Forest community, because you can see here, like, red has 3 ponds, whereas blue has 1. And in larger team games, the ability to fish boom off of these tiny ponds is definitely a little bit, it's pretty random. Now, I will say that although you can have resources spawned in, like, the little foresty island places, it's not that common, and it's never anybody's, main important, standard starting-ish resources. Also, the map generations are in some ways mitigated by the fact that Black Forest is almost always played on Explored, as opposed to, full inky blackness, like in, almost every other map. So, yeah, that's BF in a nutshell. So, back in Age of Conquerors, we can see that, honestly, Black Forest is pretty similar. I mean, this person gets 4 pawns to the other is a 0. Also in Black Forest, in larger team games, you actually can't show that, to my knowledge, in, the original Age of Conquerors map editor. You can't show, team games in that way, I guess, but you, have, a road that leads you to your allies. This one's, on a hill. But, yeah, really, it's pretty much the same Black Forest. I would say that you have your resources in these little grass islands a bit more often, but it's still not that crazy. You do have extra boars and wolves that spawn around the extremities of the map, and that's just something that you need to look out for. Some civilizations like Mongols can make big advantage of this, or can take a big advantage of this, but still, it's Black Forest. It's safe, players can boom, all of that good stuff. Oh my goodness, but yeah, you also get situations like this, much more commonly in Age of Conquerors, no matter what the map generation. Look, blue here doesn't even have easy access to their gold and stone. Oh man, that's such a lousy generation for them. Secondary gold's behind this foresty area. Yeah, I mean, you can just see that in general, the DE map scripts are much cleaner. Moving on to literally the default map back in the day. We are on Coastal. Actually, I think it's still the default map. And this was the default map, I assume, because it's kind of just this balance between land and water. Ironically, this map is almost never played in a competitive setting because it's really imbalanced, even in DE. You can see here that blue has access to this little bay area, whereas red is kind of stuck at the very edge of the map, and you can just get these really unfair spawns because it is a peninsula. Here, blue is at the tip of the peninsula, and their base can sort of easily be surrounded by galleys on all sides, but they have, I guess, easier-ish access to the water. Not really. They're closer to it for sure. Whereas here, you have the other player who is more landlocked because they are close to the edge of the map that way. They're also going to have way more resources closer to them in terms of wood. And yeah, despite being the default map, Coastal's never really been the most balanced, map out there. So, returning to Age of Conquerors, we can find a map that is even more erratic. There's a lake over here for this player, there's a lake in the middle, but this player is close to the edge of the map where the fish spawns are terrible. Oh man, this is just such a mess. This one is an island. Coastal is almost never an island, it's usually a peninsula, but this time it's an island. Red in this case is pretty darn far away from any sort of deep fish, whereas blue has at least these sorts of fish in the back of their base. Yeah, there we are back to a peninsula. There's 5 fish over here for some reason. Red, again, far away from any sort of easy access to good fishing. Actually, blue kind of is too because of the fish being far away over here. This script has blue far away from any sort of good fishing, have to go all the way up here, whereas red is like directly near the coastline next to all of these deep fish. But other than that, I mean, there are still cliffs hanging around, still other sort of normal looking map aspects. It's just coastal, man. It's never been a particularly balanced map. And once again, we have golden stone on the other side of a forest, just cuz. You can see why restarts were much more common back in the day. Next, we have a map that is very similar to coastal. It's going to be Continental. Now, this is another map that's very imbalanced in many situations. The way it works is you're on an island, at least usually. Sometimes you connect to the edge of the map, I think. You have these sorts of... Sometimes they're lakes, you can see on both sides, sort of around the middle. Usually you have something watery over here. Oftentimes there's very little space you need to wall. Yeah, you can see here, this time there are shallows for this player, whereas this person just has a small land strip, so this person is technically on an island, and this is the DE script, remember? The waterways is just kind of winding about here and there. Blue doesn't really have access to any sort of good fishing. Red, not that much either. But yeah, it's, you know, there's like a blob of land in the middle. Sometimes the edges are connected on land, creating these lakes, and sometimes they are not. Sometimes they're open on one side, like, whoa, here we go, great example. Sometimes they're open on one side, but not open on the other, and you just kind of get this maze of land and water that usually involves just walling the front and then fighting on water, and then there's like this big choke pointy fight for the middle, but just, yeah. Some really unfortunate and awkward map generations. Like in this one, red has access to much easier fishing than blue, who doesn't have access to particularly good fishing at all. And yeah, you can see that even in DE, this is a very imbalanced map. All right, back to Age of Conquerors, and we see a map that is once again, it's pretty similar. The fish are even more... oh wow, like, oh my god, so many fish over here and over here, but it's so inconsistent, there's no fish on the outside here. Also, in this map, blue has like 4 tiles to wall, whereas red is like, you have to wall a little bit over there, and then like a little bit here, and a little bit over there. Yeah, this is just such a weird map to play. Like, there's a shallows crossing right here, but not on the other side. There are no deep fish until you get over here. In this lake, there's like a bunch over here, but none over here, granting red much easier access to fishing. There's this huge swarm of fish, or school of fish, I suppose, at the edge of the map. Yeah, this map has always been such a weird one. There's a reason we don't see it in tournaments very often. Alrighty, so this video is getting pretty long, so I decided I'm going to split this into like a 3-part series with like 8 to 7 maps each. But the last map today is going to be my personal all-time favorite map, Crater Lake. Look, even in the DE version, the red has a boar that's on the other side of this forest, as well as 2 sheep. So you have 8 tiles of gold on each side, and that's the only gold on the map except for this island in the middle, where there are some wolves, and a relic usually, and there's just like a ton of gold. It's like the most snowbally and often imbalanced map in the world. I will say that DE did attempt to make the island spawning pretty fair. You can see it's pretty equidistant between the players. And, you know, both have some fish in between, you know, themselves and the gold island. Again, it's kind of a similar deal over here. Just tons of gold, some bears in the middle, and you're pretty close to the shoreline. This one, it's definitely a little bit closer to blue. Honestly, these aren't the worst generations in the world. The map is still awful because it's so snowbally. Yeah, this one's definitely closer to blue. But at least this one's actually a little bit more balanced than what you're going to see in just a second. Alright, so here we are, the single greatest map script of all time, the classic Crater Lake. Yes, this map actually goes back all the way to Age of Kings. You can see right here, red very close to the water, very close to the island, has a couple fish, but otherwise nada, whereas blue has all of these fish over here, but is very far away from all of the gold. Another generation, again, much closer to red and easier to take. Blue, access to far better fish. Also, you have 1 fewer tile of gold in the original version. You only have 7 tiles as opposed to the 8 that you get in DE. So even more snowbally. This one, it's much easier to take for blue. I don't even know what this is. It's like right across for red, whereas blue's all the way in the corner of the map. The fish generation is absolutely random. Oh my goodness. Like, you just gotta love this. There's the sheer goofiness of this map. Like, what was going through the minds of the devs when they made this? This one actually isn't that bad of a generation, although it is certainly closer for red. This one's also pretty equidistant. The fish spawn's kind of out there, but that's actually probably the best generation we've seen so far. This time red has some fish to the north, blue has some fish over here. The island's actually quite large. Oh yeah, here we go. This is a classic one. Blue has no deep fish near them, unless they dock all the way up here. Red doesn't either. Okay, they have the 3 overlapping fish over here, but then there's like this big empty patch of ocean. And then the island is right next to blue. Oh my goodness. So, perfect way to end this segment, definitely. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys just learned something as to how we have collectively changed the core maps that we play over the years in Age of Empires. Like, yeah, look at that stone in, spot. And whenever you complain about getting a bad map in DE, just know that things used to be worse. Anyway, we'll get the next part out whenever it comes out, probably within like a week or so. But thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.